Hello and welcome to the Farming Week, the podcast brought to you by Agriland and AXA Insurance, keeping you up to date with all the latest in Irish agriculture. I'm Charles O'Donnell and I'm joined by Agriland journalist Aisling O'Brien. Well, if you've been listening to the Farming Week over the last couple of weeks, you'll know that our conversations have been dominated by the fallout from Storm Éowyn. Thankfully, we're now out of the woods in terms of electricity and water supply, but for many forestry owners and horticulture producers, the real work of dealing with the storm's aftermath is now just beginning, and we'll talk about that shortly. But the big news this week for the farming community was the opening of the application process for the 2025 Basic Income Support for Sustainability, or BISS. But there are a couple of important differences this year. Aisling, what do we need to know here?
Yeah, so arguably the most important of all the farm payments, BISS, of course, which was known as the BPS, and many people probably still refer to it as the basic payment under the previous cap, Charles. I suppose just to note that this application process also includes CRIS, which is the Complementary Redistributive Income Support for Sustainability, the Eco Scheme Actions and other related schemes. They include the Protein Aid Scheme, the National Reserve and transferring of entitlements, and farmers can apply for all of the elements of direct payments online by the closing date of Thursday, May 15th. So pop that into the calendar now as you're listening to us. The deadline is the 15th of May. And annual payment claims as well for the straw incorporation measure, acres and the organic farming scheme can also be made online, along with the multi-species sward measure and the red clover silage measure as well. Now, Minister for Agriculture Martin Hayden said that over the coming weeks, farmers will be receiving a BISS information pack similar to previous years in the post, and that pack will contain their maps and land details for 2025. But as you said, Charles, some notable changes this year for BISS applicants. The department has highlighted changes around some of the GAECs. Of course, they are the Good Agricultural and Environmental Conditions, to give them their full title, particularly GAEC 7, which is crop rotation and diversification in arable lands, and the very contentious GAEC 2, which relates to protecting peatlands and wetlands. Both of those are going to be applicable this year. So applicants that are impacted by GAEC 2 will be notified in due course of the land parcels that they have that will be affected and the obligations applying to those parcels of land. Now, no timeline has been offered yet by the department because of the fact that the GAEC 2 standard is still actually subject to approval by the European Commission. Now, once it is approved, the department said it will write to all affected farmers to inform them of which parcels are in the scope of GAEC 2 requirements. So essentially, this requirement is a baseline minimum to protect carbon-rich soils. And in practice, what that means is it's only at the point, according to the department, that a farmer wishes to carry out drainage, reseeding of grassland or deep ploughing, that they need to check if that land parcel in question is a GAEC 2 parcel. So under the standard, farmers can maintain and repair an existing drain. New drains are also possible, provided that it respects existing national legislation for drainage on peatlands and wetlands. So in practice, a farmer who wants to carry out new drainage has to consult with the mapping system on the AgFood portal to check if the parcel is covered by GAEC 2. And if it is, then the relevant national provisions must be followed. So essentially that means that you'll have to seek some planning permission for that drain. Now, a system of appeal will also be available, Charles, for the new social conditionality requirement. And under that condition, an additional conditionality penalty could be applied to farmers that are found to be in breach of certain legislation relating to workplace safety, employment standards, or the safe operation of machinery in the workplace. Now, this standard, we're being told, will not involve any additional checks by the department, but it will be facilitated by cross-reporting from the WRC, which is the Workplace Relations Commission, and the Health and Safety Authority. And the department said that for farmers, there are no new requirements where this conditionality is concerned, and existing national rules on health and safety or employment law will continue to apply as normal. So they are the conditions, the T's and C's that are coming with BISS 2025 that you should be aware of.
And Aisling, farm organisations have been reacting to these new conditions and their feelings on them are mixed, I suppose, to say the least.
Yeah, one farm organisation has raised concerns that farmers actually may have to pay two penalties for the same breach of conditionality, that social conditionality we were just speaking about under the 2025 BISS. The Irish Creamery Milk Suppliers Association claimed that the new condition effectively means, Charles, that farmers could end up paying twice for the same breach, which it says is demonstrably unfair. And the ICMSA president, Dennis Drennan, said that in the event of a farmer being found at fault by the WRC or the Health and Safety Authority, the HSA, and having received a fine from them, the Department of Agriculture would then apply a further penalty to the offending farmer's BISS, automatically under cross-reporting, they said. And Drennan also said that they're disappointed to see what he said is really questionable duplication and complexity being introduced here. And he said if a farmer has been brought before the WRC or the HSA and they find against the farmer and fine that farmer, then that has to be the end of the matter. And he did point to the fact that we continuously hear politicians out there talking about red tape and bureaucracy and how they want to simplify the system and eliminate this type of duplication. And if that is the case, Drennan said, why have we ended up with this sort of overly complex system that has been rolled out with BISS 2025? Now, other reaction from the president of the IFA, the Irish Farmers Association, Francie Gorman, and he said that the implementation of GAIAC-2, which is to do with those peatland soils and the wetland soils, they should have been delayed by the government, in his opinion. He said that the association has been actually lobbying on this issue since 2021, and the implementation of GAIAC was actually postponed for the past 2 years. Now, Francie Gorman said that the Minister for Agriculture should have sought a further delay from the EU Commission to allow for the conditions to be considered under the promised simplification measures being designed by the EU currently. And he said that GAIAC-2 will actually apply to up to 35,000 farmers across the country. And he said, while the measures may not impact on many farming activities this year, it is the very thin end of the wedge and that there are real concerns that will impact on these farmers more in the future. So I suppose voicing concern there that it should have been deferred at EU level, which would have been the best outcome, just to see, you know, what simplification measures are coming from the Commission, because we know they are coming. We know that vision for agriculture document is going to be presented next week by the EU Commissioner for Agriculture as well, Christoph Hansen, Charles. So we'll get a better picture maybe of where the EU is going on cutting back on red tape for farmers again next week.
Well, it was a big week for farm payments this week, Aisling, and we also saw the start of payments under the Tillage and Horticulture Support Scheme. How much money are we talking about here? And could you remind us as well a little bit on how the scheme works?
Yeah, so the long-awaited €100 a hectare tillage payment has finally arrived this week, Charles. The payment measure for the tillage sector, people may remember, it was first announced by the then Agriculture Minister, Charlie McConalogue, at the Fianna Fáil Ardèche in April of last year. Now, that came against the backdrop, of course, of very poor weather conditions from the previous winter going into that spring. And the minister said at the time that he wanted to help tillage farmers to have confidence to plant during 2024. Now, the IFA at the time said that the payment was a long way short of what was required. They'd actually made a strong case, they said, for €250 a hectare. But that wasn't to be. And as part of Budget 2025, funding was secured to deliver on that commitment of a €100 a hectare payment. But it's to support both the tillage and horticulture growers as well, of course, who planted crops for the 2024 harvest. And of course, the horticulture sector badly impacted as well by the poor weather that we saw last year. And this week, the new Minister for Agriculture, Martin Hayden, announced that payments totaling €32.4 million were going to commence issuing to farmers under the Tillage and Horticulture Support Scheme. Now, it is €100 a hectare. It'll be made on eligible tillage and horticulture crops that were declared on a farmer's 2024 BISS application. And the minister said that these payments will be visible in farmers' bank accounts in the coming days. In some cases, it can take up to 5 days, Charles. But if it does apply to you, keep a very close eye on the bank account over the coming days to make sure that it does land in. And the department said that some 10,868 herds are actually eligible for these payments based on last year's BISS applications. Cork has the highest number of eligible herds of any county at over 1,800, followed by Wexford and Tipperary. And a full list of all of the counties and those eligible herds is available on the Agriland website and app, as is the complete list of all eligible crops, a very lengthy list of eligible crops that these payments apply to as well. Now, it is important to note that the department said that payments will not be made on protein crops which are funded under the Protein Aid Scheme, just I suppose to avoid doubling up there. So good news for tillage and horticulture growers there, because I suppose it's a long time coming, this payment, Charles. So it's something that they will be very much looking forward to seeing into their bank accounts.
And just while we're talking about the horticulture side of things, Aisling, I mentioned at the top of the show how horticulture producers as well as forest owners are going to have to deal with the long-term impact of Storm Éowyn on their crops. Can you take us through the developments on that in the last week?
Yeah, so 2 separate meetings actually took place this week, Charles, involving Minister of State at the Department of Agriculture, Michael Healy-Rae, focused on the damage caused by the recent storms and in particular Storm Éowyn. And the initial estimated impact of the damage caused by that storm to the Irish horticulture sector currently stands at almost €4.5 million. Now, it is difficult, I suppose, to quantify the exact losses that growers have experienced, but the IFA, in conjunction with the Organic Growers of Ireland, they collaborated with Teagasc to establish these preliminary costs. Now, the storm, of course, hit the country at a crucial time in the planting season for many of the country's growers, and the record-breaking winds, they destroyed polytunnels, equipment, crops, and they really did leave a trail of devastation for many horticulture growers out there. And the Horticulture Industry Forum met in Backweston yesterday. They were due to meet anyway, but that meeting was brought forward just, I suppose, given the urgency around the storm damage. And the IFA Horticulture Chair, Mark Walsh, who was at that meeting, said the initial estimate of €4.5 million is a direct structural and crop loss, and it does not include the consequential loss of business associated with structures being out of production. So the actual losses could be significantly more than that figure, Charles. Now, the IFA Horticulture Chair said it was clear that the Minister was in listening mode and he wants to understand the challenges caused by this storm. And he said that there was a commitment to review the IFA request for assistance to all storm-affected growers. Now, there were other issues also discussed at that meeting, Charles, as well, including fairness in the food supply chain for growers and perhaps the dominant position held by retailers in that chain, and also the need for additional powers for the agri-food regulator. Now, turning to forestry then, Charles, and of course that is another of the responsibilities, the direct responsibilities for Minister of State Michael Healy-Rae. He attended the second meeting of the Forest Windblow Task Force also on Tuesday, following its first meeting last week. And we learned from that meeting that a satellite imagery assessment of the damage caused to forestry around the country is due to be completed shortly. And this, of course, is going to be a critical piece of work, and it's going to give an accurate picture of the scale of the damage, which we're being told does appear to be significantly greater than that of Storm Darwin, of course, when the entire country was also put into status red alert back then as well. Now, we previously heard from Minister Michael Healy-Rae as well on Agriland that he believes at least 5,000 hectares of forestry across the country has been destroyed as a result of Storm Éowyn, and that could well rise, but he said he wasn't 100% sure where that might stop as well. Now, the task force was updated on initial figures that have come back from some private forestry companies. They indicate that more than half of forests that have been damaged actually have a felling licence. And the Department of Agriculture issued 2 circulars this week. So if you have been impacted, your plantation has been impacted, maybe these are something you might want to check out. The first circular actually outlines directions on how to assess damage to forests using satellite imagery that is freely available to people out there. And the second circular covers details to registered foresters on how to submit applications for felling and road licenses in areas affected by wind damage. Now, the department said it does expect a significant increase in licence applications following these storms for both roads and for clearfell in the coming months. And look, under the Forestry Act, wind-blown trees do require a felling licence, as they will still need to be cut, harvested and removed, the department said. And it added that it's committed to making the application process as efficient and as fast as possible for forest owners. And in parallel, they're also exploring further options for a simplified approach, while I suppose making sure that they're meeting all of their EU obligations as well. The department has also introduced a number of changes in their workflow and their systems, and they're going to redeploy staff and prioritise these wind blow related applications when it comes to forestry as well. And I suppose just on that as well, Minister Healy-Rae, who has also responsibility in his brief for farm safety, did appeal to everybody who's out there in forests as well to be very, very careful, because he said that these sites can be extremely dangerous places and that forest owners should put safety first and not attempt to tackle any of this kind of work themselves with chainsaws to make sure that everything that they're doing is safe. And that task force due to meet again next week. Now, just before we leave forestry, Charles, just to note that the Forestry Knowledge Transfer Group scheme has reopened this week for applications. It's now in its 6th year, and the whole aim of it is to increase the level of forest management activity amongst forestry owners. And each knowledge transfer group can have a maximum of 20 participants. If you want to be involved, you're going to have to attend 7 meetings or outdoor events in total in order to complete the programme. If you haven't taken part in a forestry KT group in the previous 3 years, you can apply in this round. A total of 7 meetings, as I said, will be organised per group, and the maximum payment to each participant will be €560, which translates to about €80, of course, per meeting. And if you do want to get involved, you have to submit an application to the department by 4 p.m. on Monday, March 11th. So that's just something to note as well.
And just one final update relating to Storm Éowyn, and this is more for future reference, I suppose, but Minister for Agriculture Martin Hayden in the last few days has given an important clarification on generators. Can you tell us more about that, Aisling?
Yeah, generators were so crucial, Charles, weren't they, to farmers out there who were without power for up to 2 weeks, maybe over 2 weeks in some cases, unfortunately. So last week we did report on the pod how the ICMSA had called on the revenue commissioners to allow farmers to claim VAT back on diesel generators. And they also appealed to the Department of Agriculture to allow generators to be covered by TAMS 3. Now, this week, the Minister for Agriculture clarified that backup PTO, of course, power takeoff generators are available for grant aid under TAMS 3. And he said that farmers can apply for generators under the Dairy Equipment Scheme, Organic Investment Scheme, Young Farmers Capital Investment Scheme, and the Women Farmers Capital Investment Scheme as well. And he said that there's no requirement for farmers to be milking cows in order to be eligible for a backup PTO generator. And he said that these generators are included as an investment item in the Dairy Equipment Scheme as well. And the investment is open to all farmers who declare the minimum eligibility requirement of having 5 hectares under their BISS scheme, either in the year of the application or the year before as well. So I suppose that's just something to note, as you said, Charles, for the future when it comes to generators.
Well, Aisling mentioned a few moments ago payments commencing to tillage farmers, but this week was somewhat of a double-edged sword for the tillage sector, with malting company Bourtmalt offering €230 per tonne for malting barley in its first forward offer for 2025, which the IFA described as very disappointing compared to previous years. Elsewhere on producer prices, Lakeland Dairies is the first milk processor to announce its price for suppliers for January milk. It has held its price on both sides of the border, but due to an increase in the farmers' VAT rate in Budget 2025, the price for the Republic of Ireland is slightly higher than for December at 49.75 cents per litre. The Northern Irish price remains at 40.8 pence per litre. But moving on now to the poultry sector, where there was big news and unfortunate news this week concerning bird flu. Aisling, what's the latest?
So since early December, Charles, we've had 5 detections of bird flu in wild birds in the Republic of Ireland. Now, cases have been confirmed in Galway, Dublin, Donegal, Westmeath and Wexford. And so it does show that it's been quite widespread, the spread of these detections out there as well. And Minister for Agriculture Martin Hayden said yesterday that the risk of bird flu to our poultry sector has increased recently. And for this reason, he was announcing announcing the introduction of a compulsory housing order for poultry and captive birds to protect them from the disease. Now, the minister confirmed that these new rules will come into effect next Monday, which is February 17th. And he said this will reduce the opportunity for contact with potentially infected wild birds, which is, of course, one of the ways in which the virus can spread. Now, where housing captive birds or poultry is not possible, the birds have to be confined in such a manner that they don't have access to other poultry, other captive birds or wild birds. And Minister Hayden also emphasised the importance of biosecurity when it comes to bird flu, which he said is the single most effective way to prevent the virus from spreading from wild birds into poultry or between poultry flocks as well. Now, Minister for Agriculture in Northern Ireland, Andrew Murr, also announced a mandatory housing measure for all kept birds and poultry in Northern Ireland, which will also come into effect from next Monday. Again, this legally requires all bird keepers, including owners of pet birds, commercial flocks, backyard and hobby flocks, to keep their birds indoors or otherwise separate them from wild birds. And the move is part of the avian influenza prevention zone, which was introduced in Northern Ireland as well. And I suppose both ministers, Martin Hayden and Andrew Murr, and their departments on either side of the border said they're in very close contact with each other on this matter, as Charles, the threat posed to our commercial poultry sector from bird flu, it's very stark and it's very, very serious. So it is good to see an all-Ireland approach being taken to this. Now, it's expected, we're being told by the Department of Agriculture in Northern Ireland, that the order will be in place for up to 8 weeks. And it is going to be kept under regular and close review as well. And look, just to note before we leave it, bird flu, of course, also known as avian influenza, it is a notifiable disease. So anybody out there who suspects that an animal may be affected, they have to by law report it to their district veterinary office or to their local office as soon as possible. There's hotlines and different numbers as well, and you can look those up on our website and app as well, Charles.
Now, just before we move on to our next item, I just want to make you aware of this week's episodes of our sister podcast, AgriFocus, as there are actually 2 AgriFocus episodes this week. One is with Borbia's beef sector manager Mark Zieg on the trajectory of beef prices, and the other is with ICBF CEO Sean Coughlin on the long-running controversy over the revised Eurostar indices. Here's a clip of Sean Coughlin speaking to Agriland beef specialist Breffney O'Brien on the ICBF's efforts to communicate the Eurostar changes to farmers.
Undoubtedly, more can be done. I mean, the star ratings, I mean, they can be complex enough, right? In fairness, and there's a huge range of understanding out there among farmers, from farmers that have a really, really detailed understanding to farmers who don't really have an understanding. So that's an ongoing journey, and undoubtedly, it's a continued focus for us. We have a lot of work to continue to do there.
That was Sean Coughlin from ICBF there speaking on Agriland's AgriFocus podcast. And you can check out both of this week's AgriFocus episodes with Sean Coughlin and Mark Zieg on Agriland.ie and the Agriland app. But moving on now, and indeed moving back to an issue that often comes up on the Farming Week, which is the Agri-Climate Rural Environment Scheme, or ACRES. Aisling, you had an update for us this week that's important for commonage lands. What are the details on this?
Yes, Charles. So the Department of Agriculture this week has said that farmers who are unhappy with the score assigned to their commonage under acres can now seek a review. And I suppose it's important to note that the scoring of commonage is undertaken by a third party on behalf of the department when it comes to acres. Now, acres cooperation project teams conduct the scoring where the commonage falls within the respective acres CP zones. And then in the case of non-CP commonage, the department employs contractors to undertake the scoring. So the department has said that there's going to be a 3-step process put in place for participants seeking a review of these commonage scores. So initially, the farmer must submit a request to the relevant acres CP scheme or commonage scoring contractor that actually gave the score in the first place for the commonage for an internal review to be undertaken. And during that review, all available data, including the scorecard and notes, will be examined, and a site visit could be deemed necessary. And it is important to note that this request has to be made within 3 months of receiving the commonage scorecard summary. Now, once that review is completed, if the farmer is still unhappy with the explanation that has been provided, they may then submit a request directly to the Department of Agriculture within 21 days for them to carry out their own review then as well. And in the case after that, the third section or step of the process comes into play. And if farmers are not happy at that stage and they're not happy with either the internal review or the department review, they can then appeal the decision to the Agriculture Appeals Office, which of course operates independently of the department as well. And I suppose just staying on acres very briefly, the Department of Agriculture today has announced as well that a procedure is also now in place for withdrawing approved acres NPIs, that is non-productive investments. The department said in a circular that farmers participating in acres CP could withdraw an acres NPI annual works plan in full or withdraw individual actions. And you can find more details on the website and app about that.
Finally this week, we'll end with some agri-politics. The last week has seen new county chairpeople elected for Wexford and Limerick county executives of the IFA. So Aisling, who are the new faces?
Yeah, so 2 new IFA county chairs elected this week. Firstly, Monday night, attention was focused very firmly on Wexford because Tom Doyle was elected there as the new Wexford IFA chair. He's a beef and tillage farmer from Camolan near Gorey. He was the sole candidate for the position at the AGM of the county executive. He was previously the chair of the IFA's National Farm Business Committee, and he is the husband of the current IFA Deputy President, Alice Doyle. Now, I was speaking to Tom after his election, Charles. He said among his priorities are to ensure that the over-regulation in farming is addressed and that farmers are respected. And he also wants to ensure more active participation in the IFA by staying in regular contact with members through the branch structure. And the outgoing Wexford IFA chair, Ger O'Mahony, who'd come to the end of his 4-year term, wished Tom Doyle all the very best as he takes over the position. And Ger O'Mahony actually told the AGM on the night that during his tenure, he sent 30,000 texts, 10,000 emails, and made up to 5,000 phone calls. And he also attended some 1,600 meetings during that period. So that just shows the commitment of an IFA chair, and fair play to Ger for outlining, I suppose, the commitment to the position. Then attention last night turned to County Limerick, where Louise Crowley, a dairy farmer from Croom, and Eddie Moriarty, who's a mixed farm in Anglesborough, contested the election to become the county chair. A very large attendance in Adare for that meeting and for that vote, with Louise Crowley coming out on top after the count took place. So she's now going to replace Sean Lavery, who has completed his 4-year term as Limerick IFA chair. And Louise was the Limerick IFA county secretary for the past 4 years, which she said made her well aware of the issues facing the farmers on the ground. She said she was a derogation farmer herself, so that will be a top priority. She also said that forestry was a big issue in the county, along with bovine TB, environmental targets and generational renewal, given that she's a young farmer, will be among her priorities for the next 4 years as well. And the outgoing Limerick IFA chair, Sean Lavery, told the meeting that he hoped his successor would benefit from high commodity prices, good weather and politicians that deliver on their promises, Charles. I'm sure that's what all IFA county chairs would have on their wish list as well. So we wish Louise and Tom all the very best as they embark on their new terms.
That's where we'll leave it for today. But just before we go, we just want to say congratulations to Arthur and Anne Murphy from County Wexford, who have won the coveted Grain Grower of the Year title at the Tier-Long Quality Grain Awards for 2024. At the awards this week, Arthur and Anne were singled out for their exceptional attention to detail in producing top quality grains on their family farm. So very well done to both of them on what is a truly brilliant achievement. But that does bring us to the end of today's show. Please don't forget to rate, review and follow The Farming Week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love if you could spare some time to give us 5 stars and share The Farming Week with anyone you think might be interested. From Aisling and myself, thanks for listening.